Du lytter til Købcentret, en podcast om marketing og salg på kundens præmisser. Dine værter er Jesper Toft og Brian Strede. Vi er tidligere medstiftere af verdens største HubSpot-bureau, og i dag er vi selvstændige konsulenter med fokus på henholdsvis salg og marketing. I Købcentret dykker vi ned i, hvordan B2B-virksomheder kan blive bedre til at lave marketing og salg, der flugter med den måde, som den moderne kunde ønsker at købe. Velkommen indenfor.
So, welcome to this episode of, in Danish we call it Købcenter, but now we have a visitor from the United States, Scott Brinker.
Thanks
welcome
for having
to
me,
the show.
guys.
So we are, today is actually the buying center. And before you are introducing yourself, then I just want to make a little intro to today's episode. Because we often talk about a lot of different digital tools, and over the last years it just emerged in the space of sales and marketing, and I find it really hard to keep up with all the new stuff that's out there. So the question was actually, how do you keep up? And for helping us answering this question, we have invited you, Scott. Could you make a little introduction about yourself?
Well, believe me, I know the challenge of trying to keep up with this. So I wear two hats. My profession is I actually run the platform ecosystem for HubSpot and all of their technology partners. I've been doing that for 6.5 years. Before that, I was a SaaS entrepreneur myself, built a platform for interactive content. So I've seen it both as an ISV to large platforms, and working at one of the larger platforms. And it's all about like, how do you get these tech stack tools to work together better? But the other hat I wear is for 16 years, I've been writing a blog, chiefmartec.com, really looking more broadly at this intersection between the whole field of technology and the whole field of marketing. These things used to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, 15, 20 years ago. And now, of course, they're like deeply entangled. And one of the things I've done over the years, is maintain a graphic that I suspect, for better and worse, some of these listeners have seen of like, what are all the different marketing technology tools out there? A landscape that started with a few hundred, which seemed like a lot, and has now grown to an insane, like well over 10,000. So believe me, I'm just trying to keep up with everything that's out there.
Yeah, because we just talked about earlier that, as you said, there was a couple of hundred. I remember actually doing research for marketing automation systems for 10 years ago. And I was like, 3 or 4 of these tools were out there and actually doing anything. HubSpot was one of them. And now there are literally hundreds of tools that are communicating with customers. What has actually been some of the biggest changes that you encountered over just the last couple of years?
All right. So there's a couple big changes. Obviously, the big one that everyone talks about, is what happened here with generative AI. I think, don't get me wrong, like actually we've had AI from a machine learning perspective steadily get adopted by more and more Martec tools over the past 10 years. And in many cases, it's been invisible to most users because, it's just, how do we help you identify, churn risks? How do we, do propensity scores on, lead groups? How do we create audience segments? All very useful stuff, but in some ways not, it doesn't necessarily reveal itself in a way that people say like, oh my goodness, this AI is amazing. And then we had ChatGPT come out, a year and a half ago, and that really did blow people's mind. And sort of since then, we've been on this like incredibly accelerated race where, across marketing, certainly across other industries too, of how generative AI is getting embedded in everything from like content creation to the way in which we interact with tools to the way in which we manage data. So anyway, so it's that whole space of generative AI, but I want to give you at least one other trend that isn't generative AI, because everybody is always talking about the AI stuff. And that is, in parallel, we've seen this steady move towards aggregating data in like a common data layer across the company, primarily in these cloud data warehouses. And as almost any listener who, again, has worked with Martec tools, I mean, one of the challenges the industry had is every tool had its own little database, its own little data silo. And yeah, we did integration work to help, throw pieces of data from one to the other, but it was still relatively constrained in the bandwidth of that data sharing. And now what you're seeing is this steady movement towards having these cloud data layers where every tool kind of has to feed its data into the cloud data layer, and increasingly tools can now pull data from the cloud data layer. And it's very early in this process, but I think it's a really significant evolution in how we start to be able to look not just across our Martec stack, but across our entire business tech stack, and get data into a more unified environment.
Yeah, because if you look at master data management, that has been one of the key drivers for many years for big organizations that has production one place and they have sales another place and they have warehouses another place. All those data actually gives you or reveals a lot of like secrets about your company and how you perform. And it seems like all the companies that I worked for the last 10 years, when you talk about data, it's like, yeah, we know our data, but we don't know where they are. And they are definitely not connected. So there must be a huge upside for starting looking into those data and start utilizing it in another way. So what are the trends out there for these companies that are trying to consolidate data in a data warehouse?
I mean, again, I feel like there's been a whole series of attempts to do this. So master data management has been around for a very long time. I was, certainly one of the, like original sets of technologies to let's help at least get aligned on certain. People always talk about the source of truth, all right? Like the whole point of MDM is like, well, let's have a certain source of truth for a particular kind of data. Things like CRMs originally were doing that for customer records. The movement around CDPs, customer data platforms, was almost kind of then an evolution of, again, like finding a way to like orchestrate data more broadly across, the marketing org. But again, every single one of these had the challenge that they helped, but it was often a local solution. And I don't mean local like geographically in the physical world, but like local, like, it would touch a certain set of systems for a certain set of use cases, but it wouldn't do it globally across the entire tech stack. And you ended up with several different we've got our MDM system here, and we've got our CDP there, and we've got our CRM over there. And so, hey, if one source of truth is good, surely 3 sources of truth is even better, right? Okay, maybe not. The thing here about trying to move to this idea of a cloud data warehouse layer, it's not a panacea, because just because you're getting all the data into one layer doesn't automatically guarantee that it's going to be rationalized, that the sort of the metadata and the consistency of that. There are challenges with that too. But this is at least the first step of being able to say, okay, at least there is one common place where if every tool can connect to these things, we can at least get the data flowing. Now what we need to have on top of that is data governance. And because there is this consistency that's happening around these cloud data layers, you're seeing a lot of amazing tools that are being developed, a lot of technology to okay, great, now let's build on top of this. Let's, in many ways, create sort of the sort of MDM and CDP capabilities to basically bring that to the cloud data warehouse, so you can still do this consistency, around certain data sets and how you want them to work with. But anyways, I don't want to come across as saying this is all solved and easy and we're good. This is, again, pretty early in that evolution. But since you were asking about trends, this is the one that I think it's a really significant one. And if we play it out over the next 5+ years, I think it is going to fundamentally change the architecture of tech stacks as we know them.
But when we talk about the data and processes and
tools like this, it often becomes like an internal thing. How do we put together our tech stacks so things are a little bit easier for us and we can get insights and so on? But how does the what you just described, how does that translate into a better buying experience, for example? What does that actually enable us to do? Because as we've talked about, what we want to discuss here is a lot about how do we actually enable our customers to have a better buying experience, and tools that can actually help with that. But can you maybe explain a little bit how that architecture that you just described, how that translates into something that actually benefits the customer?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked this. I know we had talked previously, I've often used this like 2x2, for any sort of technology rollout of like, okay, what's bad for the company, what's good for the company, what's bad for the customer, what's good for the customer. And it's one of the biggest risks we've seen again and again when people take on, automation, as one kind of technology where they see a process that might be bad for the company and they're like, oh, okay, well, here's how we can implement the automation that will make this better for the company. And it does, at least by those internal, metrics, like, oh yeah, this takes this much less time. This is great. But it's very easy in those projects to lose sight of like, okay, well, is this making the customer experience better? Is it in some cases actually making it worse? Anyways, great question. I think there are basically two ways that let's just take this trend about getting data more connected across the organization. There are two ways that you should look at how this can benefit customer experience. The first is this thing about generating insights it's an internal process, but it should very much be in the service of how are we actually making life better for our customers? Like the insights you should be trying to get here is like, what's working well for our customers? What's not working well with customers? And the fact that, again, you go back to this mode where when you had all these different data silos from all these processes spread out across your business, it was very easy. Like you couldn't connect the dots. And, for customers, they have no idea of these internal systems or silos. All they know is like, hey, this is how things were for me when I was researching this. This is what it was like when I was doing a purchase. This is like when I needed customer support, and boy, this sure seems like disconnected. When I have email with them, it's this thing. When I call them on the contact center, it's this other thing. Exactly. If I talk to someone on social media for help, like, something entirely different, and so I think this idea of being able to connect all this data is to help us get insights across the full life cycle, the customer experience. But then there is also like an active opportunity, right? We are using technology to shape these digital customer touch points. In fact, actually even touch points that are still human touch points, like a contact center. They're often also behind the scenes, like that contact center rep is, they've got a screen in front of them and they're being fed, a set of data and they have a set of levers they can pull. And so getting the data connected across your organization has the potential for you to actually apply this to create better customer experiences across those digital touch points or those digitally supported touch points. But the key word there is potential. Yes, it has the potential to do that, but it doesn't just automatically happen just because you get all your data like flowing through, a universal data layer. Yeah, it is still very much on you to be asking the right questions, driving the right insights, and then leveraging those insights to actually make changes to the experiences to use that data to make life better for the customer.
Yeah. If let's say a B2B company came to you and said, Scott, we would really like to align our marketing, sales, customer service with how our customers want to buy. Help us build the perfect tech stack. You can tear the whole thing down and start from scratch. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, again, like I would start with the customer and the customer journey. Like I am. It's funny. I've ended up with this like people think of me because of that crazy Martec landscape is like, oh, Scott, he loves Martec tools. He's the biggest advocate for Martec tools. And the truth is, I'm like, Well, there are means to the end, but
Yeah.
actually getting people too focused on the tools, I mean, it's the wrong place to start. What you want to start with is like, okay, well, what is the actual customer journey? What are the touch points we need to have with customers? What are the expectations those customers are going to have at those touch points? Because I think if you start with that map, it's then a lot easier to go into the technology selection process by saying like, okay, I can now evaluate my tech choices by the role they're going to play, in either a piece of that experience or the orchestration of the experience as a whole. So if you don't have that map, I wouldn't start going out and like buying technology. You're not ready for it. But once you've got that map, yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at technologies to support it, there is almost always a couple layers to this. There is usually the underlying platform that's going to serve as the center of gravity for how we orchestrate things happening across the journey. The most common solutions for this are CRMs and CDPs. B2B businesses tend to align it more around a CRM. B2C organizations tend to align it more around CDPs. You then have very closely related to that, very often these like marketing automation. Well, in B2B, they still call it like marketing automation platforms. In B2C, they've started referring to them as customer engagement platforms. But they're basically the things like, okay, if you sort of think of that CRM or CDP as like the sort of the center of gravity from like a data record perspective, these marketing automation or customer engagement platforms tend to be at the layer around, okay, well, what are the like campaigns or marketing programs or touch points that we're like orchestrating around that? Very closely related, that tends to be every business has a website. Many also have like mobile apps and things like this. Typically, there's these things called DXPs, digital experience platforms. They're kind of a fancy way of what we used to just call like, oh yeah, what are you using for your website? What's your CMS platform? Now it's DXP. Oh, that sounds so much cooler. So I think if you have a CRM CDP, you have a marketing automation customer engagement platform, and you have a, DXP, for most businesses, that's sort of like the core platforms. And then you end up typically augmenting those with more specific tools for, I mean, every business is different. Like, what are the channels in which you're trying to engage? Are you doing a lot of advertising? If so, there might be like a DSP ad management platform. Depending on if you've got a lot of social engagement, you might be using a, social media management, social media marketing platform to help orchestrate that. It sort of goes, into the long tail from there.
But it seems like there's like sometimes a little bit of a disconnection, because we also say to our customers, go out and talk with your customers, because it's where you actually get all your input. And then I remember one time when I was visiting actually one of my customers, and they were doing some crazy shit with 3D and virtual reality. And I thought I'd seen the most of it. When I saw that, it simply just exploded in my head, because that experience was so powerful that I haven't thought about that, and I definitely haven't thought about going out and ask the customers, well, what about 3D? Because they would not do anything about that. And now 3D is really used in like a lot of places where, well, how would it look like in your own home? Or imagine this, and you can actually sit in the car before you purchase it. So isn't there also some kind of like, you have to be innovative about the way that you actually are transforming the input from your customers, and say, well, we might do some research. I wonder if there is a platform somewhere. So there is like a educational point of view or experience point of view before you can actually go out and make the connection between what is it that your customers want and what's available out there. So How do you go about that?
You're definitely asking the graduate level questions on this, because right. So the simple answer that is the one I gave of like, okay, well, start with your strategy, the customer experience you're looking to drive, and then move down
Yeah,
to tech selection from there. Which again, other things being equal, I think is still a good place to start. But you're absolutely right that the world is not static. The competitive environment for businesses is not static. And so there is actually a case to be made for teams investing in exploratory technology work to like understand, okay, well, what's the state of the art? What's shifting? What are the new things that have the potential to disrupt the way in which our customers, purchase, or the way our customers experience these things. And the reason you want to do that exploratory work is because it actually feeds back to your strategy. It allows you to rethink. Well, okay, what is the customer journey that we're going to create? Should it be different than this? What is the strategy we're taking to that? And it's trying to find the balance to that if you get too narrowly focused on doing things the way sort of like industry best practice is almost by definition what everybody is doing, which again is probably a decent place to start if you don't know what else you're going to do. But from a competitive perspective, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be doing what everybody else is doing. Marketers want to be pioneering, like, how do we do something better, than what everybody else is doing, and that's where you then have to find this balance of being able to do the exploratory work and the innovation work. It's just the balance is key because it's very easy to slip into spending too much time on the exploratory work with the recognition that, I mean, this is almost like a universal precept across innovation. Most things we try and we experiment with don't work. Now, you still need to do it because every now and again, like if 1 out of 10 works, it's that 1 out of 10 that becomes a win, so you need to have some ability to do that experimental work. But if you also have to hit your numbers for like, okay, what do we owe the business from a performance results for this quarter? There's some of the like tried and true that still needs to actually be done well.
Yeah, there's a lot of shiny objects out there that you can be distracted by. Are there maybe some like important or common pitfalls you see people fall into when they're trying to pick the right tools? Are there something that you would be a good thing to avoid when you try to put together this tech stack?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, all right, so when you're in the exploratory mode, keeping an open mind, like look at the demos the way the vendors are presenting them by all means, because you're not making decisions, you're simply trying to learn what's possible out there. But once you shift into a mode that, okay, we're actually going to make a bet on something and we want to evaluate potential technologies for this, it is incredibly important to not let the vendors drive those conversations. You need to be the one who comes in with very clear use cases of what it is. Okay, this is how we'd like this to work. This is what we need this to integrate with, and when the vendor tries to give you their like, hey, let me show you this perfectly canned, beautifully orchestrated demo, you're like, yeah, no, thanks, that's fine. What I need you to do is show me how we would do these following use cases in your tool. How would this connect with this other system? Because again, like, I mean, this is not a knock against vendors. I mean, I work for a large Martec vendor myself. I mean, again, by default, they're going to show you like, hey, this is what we think the best solutions in general for people are. But you as the buyer, your use cases may be very different than everyone else's, and so to really make sure you're going into that sales process, asking the vendor very explicitly to show how they're going to solve the use cases that you need.
That's a really good point, because that's also what we experienced, that every time we do a shitty demo because nobody came prepared. It's like, well, I can show you this and I can show you that, and here is a fish, and it's like, perhaps that was what you were looking for. So sometimes it is like a really good idea to prep yourself and also your crew to investigate when you're buying something, make a good use case. because it's also easy for the company to say, well, if that's the case, then we are not the right solution. Then you would like a tool that can actually generate recurring whatever revenue overview or what is needed right now. So one of the things that you said before is that sales and marketing used to be in like their own end of the stick,
marketing,
and now they're
but you could make the same
it.
case for sales and marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, but that has actually been there's a huge distance between them sometimes. How do you think that looking into like digital tools can enable them to work better together and thereby be a better fit for the customers?
Well, I mean, the marketing and sales divide is a long and storied history. I picture them almost as clans, in some sort of Shakespearean drama. But like a great first step here, though. I mean, so there's cultural issues, there's management issues, there's a ton of things, a number of which I am not qualified to advise on. But from a technology perspective, a good place to start is like, okay, are we actually aligned on the same data? Are we looking at the same metrics? Are we, when we connect with the same systems that are showing us views into what's happening with a customer, is it the same system? Is it the same view? Because if you look at tech stacks, I mean, there've been lots of disconnect even just within marketing tech stacks. But sales has developed its own tech stack. In fact, actually over the past few years, the sales tech stack has had a whole explosion, of like specialized tools and innovations, which again, at one level is great, but making sure that, as a operations organization, that you're able to get these tools and these data connected, like that's essential. I mean, there's a ton of work to build on top of that, from how you manage this, how you enable it, how you, shift the cultural norms around how these teams collaborate. But having the systems and data synchronized is a good start.
So, Scott, we have been on for a little bit over 25 minutes now, and I think that I have so many questions, so I think that we'd have to do another session with you. So, like for the newcomer that has to go out and like start looking into how can we do something better for our clients, number one advice, like look at the customers. And what I also heard you say was like, be curious, go out there and explore stuff, and be specific about what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
Any good advice besides that?
The third thing is talk to your peers, particularly in sales and marketing, but now in so many like professions now, they've become these really great like peer communities, whether it's across LinkedIn or, independent communities. It's a great place to go because, whatever challenges you're running into or questions you have, there are probably other peers out there who have had similar experiences. Maybe they've tried some things that work well. Maybe they've tried some things that didn't work so well, and to be able to sort of exchange that knowledge, that's super valuable.
Great advice.
Scott, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for your time, Scott.
Again.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Thank
you. And thank you for listening and watching out there, and looking forward to next time. Thank you so much.